Hello, I'm Robert, a fact checker, voluntary fact checker, and helping you if you're scared. And this is something that most people don't know about fallout. And this shows that the authorities don't think there's a real significant risk of nuclear war, or they would make sure we all knew these things. We knew this back in the Cold War. So the first thing is, and then I've got all these previous debunks to go and look at, which help give you the context. For instance, that the US is likely at the least alert nuclear defense posture. They say over and over again when they're asked that they don't see any sign of Putin preparing, despite all his rhetoric, and there's no need to change the US's own nuclear defense posture since before the war started. So just to these two misconceptions. So first of all, most people don't realize that fallout is heavy dust. And if you look at the mushroom cloud, then it's dust that goes all the way up into the mushroom cloud, high above your head, and then it falls all the way down to the ground. So it has to be quite heavy. Anything light or any gases or fog or stuff, then that obviously wouldn't fall to the ground. And so it's stuff you can see on the ground, it's dirt, it's a bit like the sand that falls out of the sky sometimes after a dust storm in Sahara, that sort of thing. And you'd see it covering cars, covering the road. And so that's why if you go and look at the nuclear advice, which they aren't giving us because they don't need to know, it is your most important thing is within 15 minutes to get indoors and stay indoors. Because if you do that, you get away from the dust, and to brush off any dust if you don't manage to get in 15 minutes, because when it hits the ground. The other thing that most people don't know, and you don't need to know, because there's no risk of, they don't think there's a real risk, or they would be telling us, is that the most intense radioactivity is very short-lived and it's right at the start. And it falls tenfold every 7 times increase. So what you had at 15 minutes, then at 1 hour and 45 minutes, you've only got a tenth of it. And the reason is because radioactivity is the most intense radioactivity, means lots of atoms are splitting very quickly, and means most of the atoms are gone very soon. And the radioactivity is divided up into lots of different elements, and some that have that decay very quickly, and those are the most intensely radioactive, some that decay more slowly, and then some of the ones that decay quickly decay into other ones that decay more slowly. And then there's a chain sometimes of several atoms like that. And out of that entire complex of lots and lots of different rates of decay, then they find empirically, they find by measuring that the radioactivity falls about tenfold every 7 times it increases. The time increases for the first 49 days, 9 hours at least. So it's after 1 hour, whatever it is, say 1,000 of these units, if it's 1,000 of these units wherever you are, then after 7 hours it'll be down to just 100 of them, and after 48 hours it's down to just 10 of them, much less radioactive. And after 48 hours it's reasonably safe if you need to go out for a short time to do something, to go out of your shelter. But the emergency services would be there probably long before then, because earlier than that, if you've got hazmat suits and you've got ambulances and things like that, then you could drive through the fallout dust and you could go and help people. So those are the essentials, and this means that the nukes don't make the ground permanently radioactive. The ground itself doesn't become radioactive, it's the dust. If you could get rid of the dust, then you get rid of the radioactivity. And so, like for instance, if you've got a road and it's covered in dust, and if you can get rid of the dust, either it gets washed away, or you could have like some giant Hoover things they have and get rid of the dust, then you get rid of the radioactivity. And so it is possible to clean up after a nuclear war and clean up the radioactivity. And then most civilians, you can see, would survive a nuclear attack. It's just like with any bomb. that obviously you're not going to survive if you're hit by the bomb itself. But if you're far enough away to avoid that, and the idea, again, that's an idea that you sometimes get wrongly from some movies, and then various other things. As I just explained, you've got to be indoors and think of the walls between you and the dust, so it's the dust you think about. It's not the air, not the fog. And it's the first few minutes to hours of when you get the most damage. So it's what you do in the first few minutes is what matters. But you don't need to know these things. I'm saying this just because they haven't told you, because you don't need to know. And if they thought there was a serious risk, they would be telling you all these things. And this is part of my much longer article, which I think I'll actually should do a separate video about that, rather than extend this one, which I did my first draft of this video. But there's well, the one thing that you can read from this also is that nukes aren't going to do nearly as much as people think they might on the nuclear battlefield. They don't make the battlefield permanently radioactive either. So just like the rescue vehicles could come in after a few hours to the next day, and same with soldiers with fast moving vehicles, and they won't even need hazmat suits if they're in the vehicles. So there's very limited use you can actually make of tactical nukes in the battlefield, and it would just be very demoralizing for Putin. It would be no advantage unless he has something concentrated he can hit, but he's not going to. There's nothing that the Ukrainians present that he's been able to find. So it's not going to be useful for war in Ukraine, and so I'll go into that more in that link to detail. And it would actually make things far more demoralizing for his own people, because they haven't been trained to work with fallout. And so then I talk about about the only reason that makes any sense, and in a very stupid kind of sense, he'd become a rogue nation if he used them to terrorize the Ukrainians. And the Indians and Chinese, of course, would have to be absolutely against him if he did that, if he used it as a terror weapon. And the only reason, so it'd be rubbish for his foreign policy, the only reason he could do that is to try and satisfy his ultranationalists, and just to show he can, as it were. And so that's the only thing really that Putin and Zelensky and are really, could he be so stupid as to do that just for the momentary doing it because his ultranationalists want it. And it doesn't seem, he has done some stupid things in the war, but it's hard to see him doing this. It's so very dumb. But to underline this and to make absolutely sure that he doesn't do that, then Jake Sullivan has conveyed privately some warning, and we know from how especially the last few weeks of the war, that the Russian air defences are just useless against NATO weapons. They can't stop them. And so he has probably conveyed something to him like that the pride of your fleet, your pride of your military, the Black Sea Fleet, then that's going to start sinking and follow the Moskva to the floor of the Black Sea if you use just a single tactical nuke. It'd be something designed not to try and do a tit for tat, him fighting back, but something so humiliating it would be it would mean he's got and various other strikes like that would basically be the end of an effective military in the battlefield, and be utterly humiliating for Putin. And certainly NATO would have that capability if they felt that there was a need to do it. And so they would have conveyed that to him privately to avoid any misunderstandings, and to, as a deterrent, to stop him from using his tactical nuke, because he knows what's going to happen if he does. And so with that, and they think that they think that he's not going to use it, and I think the reasoning is reasonably convincing that so it goes from being incredibly vanishingly unlikely and exceptionally unlikely to how could he possibly do it, as basically the situation now. So anyway, I'll upload that, and I might do a longer video explaining those last few points, which is the main point in the linked article.